So we've already done a few graphics card reviews on this channel, and if you've watched my recent YouTube paycheck video, then you'll know that I can't actually afford any of them. In this video, however, we'll be taking a look at a card that's at least somewhat within my budget. MSI's RX 5500 XT Gaming X. The 5500 XT is a relatively new addition to AMD's more budget-friendly lineup, and it should be a pretty dang decent 1080p monster. But is it the best bang for the buck 1080p monster, or is it just another overpriced underperformer? Well, before we can answer that question, we actually need to take a look at what we're dealing with here. The RX 5500 XT is built on the same Navi RDNA architecture as both the 5600 and 5700 series cards, but with trimmed down specs to match its price. It's equipped with 22 compute units totaling 1408 stream processors and manages a base and boost clock of 1607 MHz and 1845 MHz respectively, with our Gaming X version coming in with a healthy overclock to the base clock of 1685 MHz. It also comes packed with 8 GB of GDDR6 memory running at 14 GB per second with a 128-bit bus. The 5500 XT also comes in a 4 GB flavor, but we'll talk about that in just a little bit. The card is pretty dang efficient, coming in with a TDP of just 130 watts and only requiring a single 8-pin connector. And then lastly, our Gaming X version ships with a single HDMI 2.0 port and 3 DisplayPort ports. Oh, and it also features support for PCIe Gen 4, not that it really matters right now. What does matter is that there's currently a promotion running for the card where if you buy the card, you'll also be able to snag yourself a copy of Resident Evil 3 and Ghost Recon Breakpoint, as well as a 3-month Xbox Game Pass for PC subscription, totes for free. Okay, so that was the 5500 XT. So let's see what MSI's Gaming X version actually brings to the table. First up, I know I've said it before with my 5700X and 2060 Super review, but hot dang do I love MSI's new Gaming X designs. I don't know what exactly it is about them, but I'm in love. Actually, no, I do know what it is. MSI threw out the hardcore gamer aesthetic in favor of a much cleaner, much more approachable, and classy look overall that I think works fantastically well. The refined lines, the multi-toned brushed metal, the extra thickness, and everything else just comes together perfectly. And even the slight red accents around the fans have started to grow on me. The RGB lighting zone on the side of the card is as perfectly diffused as ever and adds a touch of color to the whole party. Whether that touch of color is a welcome one or not depends on your personal preference, but I personally think that the card would have been just a little boring without it. And luckily the card isn't all show, as its added thickness and brushed metal feels almost as good as it looks. This is one of the more premium 5500 XT versions you can get, and MSI wants you to know that. The build quality of this thing is pretty much impeccable too, with barely a flex or creak anywhere, even on the mostly plastic parts of the shroud, and that metal backplate is absolutely solid. But none of that would mean anything if the card didn't have some serious cooling power to back it up. And while that's exactly what we'll be testing in just a bit, the specs alone seem to indicate that it has just that. Kicking things off, we have the same Torx 3.0 fans with regular and dispersion blades as seen in the other current gen Gaming X cards. And just like the fans in those cards, these don't spin up until the card hits at least 60 degrees Celsius, which means that the card is essentially dead quiet for 80% of the time that it's actually in your system, and it means a longer lifespan for the fans. Wins all around. The card's beefy heatsink also ups the game a fair bit, featuring an impressive amount of surface area and 5 heat pipes to help dissipate heat from the GPU, while thermal pads should keep the memory and VRM controllers nice and cool too. Now, while I could personally talk about thermal pads and sexy heat pipes all day long, I think it's about time we put this thing to the test and run some benchmarks. First though, there have been a few changes around here lately. My beard's a little shorter, I admit, but more importantly, we have a new test bench up and running. So for this benchmark run, we're working with the Core i7 7700K clocked at 4.9 GHz, a Z270 Gaming Pro Carbon motherboard, Cooler Masters Master Liquid ML240R AIO, and 16 gigs of Ballistics RAM running at 2667 MHz. And it's all contained within MSI's MPG Gunrare 100 case, which actually looks kind of awesome. Just a quick note here, for benchmarking purposes, I removed the case's front and top panels along with the glass side panel for unhindered airflow. Okay, let the benchmarking commence! Starting us off is Unigen's Superposition Synthetic Benchmark set to 1080p using the High preset. It's a pretty demanding benchmark, as you can see straight away with the average FPS coming in at 49. But it's also a really stable one, with the 5500 XT managing a 1% and 0.1% low of 41 and 38 respectively. The first actual game we tested was Shadow of the Tomb Raider using the high preset, and the 5500 XT got through it without a hitch, managing an average FPS of 60 along with really decent lows. Next up is Metro Exodus, running in DX11 and using the high preset. And even though this is one of the most demanding titles to run right now, the 5500 XT held its own pretty well with an average FPS of 40 and respectable 1% and 0.1% lows. Moving on to esports titles, this is where the 5500 XT really shines. In Apex Legends, using the high preset, the card managed an average FPS of 103 with lows reflecting almost zero stuttering in sight. The card was even more impressive in Overwatch using the high preset, where it averaged 146 FPS with crazy good 1% and 0.1% lows. And finally, wrapping things up was Fortnite, using the high preset, which saw the 5500 XT averaging 119 FPS with decent, although less than stellar, 0.1 and 1% lows. The 5500 XT definitely has some serious 1080p chops, especially in esports titles, and even for single-player AAA games, as long as you're okay with dropping settings here and there just a little bit. And just like the other current-gen Gaming X cards from MSI that I've already tested, this one is impressively cool and quiet too. At idle with an ambient temp of around 28 degrees, the card sat around the 44 degree mark, and during gaming, that only ramped up to a max of 77 degrees, all while the fan maxed out at just 66%, or 2104 RPM. So clearly what we're looking at here is a really great GPU for 1080p gaming, and with MSI's design thrown in, a really cool and just gorgeous one at that. But, and this is a pretty big one, I don't actually think that you should go out and buy a 5500 XT. At least not if you're looking for the absolute best bang for the buck 1080p GPU on the market right now. Because unfortunately, the 8GB 5500 XT ain't it, fam. Instead of using the 5500 XT as a big old middle finger to Nvidia, AMD priced the card at $200 and turned that finger right on themselves. And of course, AMD's board partners are forced to follow suit, with MSI's Gaming X version coming in at $224.99, or 4,965 Rand here in South Africa. AMD's pricing wouldn't have been all that much of an issue if the card existed in a vacuum with no other competition in sight. But it doesn't, and the competition at this price range is all kinds of stiff. Nvidia's 1650 Super performs just about as well, if not better than the 5500 XT, in multiple games, and is currently selling for around 160 bucks, while the 1660 non-Super straight up wrecks it and can be found for around 200 bucks. And if that competition from Nvidia wasn't bad enough, AMD also faces competition from themselves. Both the RX 580 and RX 590 are still very much around, offer a similar level of performance to the 5500 XT, and at lower prices to boot, with the RX 580 selling for around $160 and the 590 going for around $190. One of the few things the 5500 XT has going for it is that it's significantly more power efficient than both of those cards, and I really do commend AMD for that. But I doubt any of us really chooses our GPU according to which one draws the least power. A more useful incentive to go for the 5500 XT rather than those two old cards is that game promotion I mentioned earlier. But while those two games and Game Pass subscriptions are mighty tempting, it really comes down to you to decide whether they're tempting enough. Hell, even if you absolutely despise Nvidia and really don't want to buy an older generation AMD card, you still have a better option in the 5500 XT 4GB version. It can be found for around $180, it comes very, very close to the performance of the 8GB version, and it has the same TDP. Of course, you do lose half of the VRAM, and even at 1080p, some games like Battlefield 5 will run worse because of it, but for like 90% of games, the difference will be pretty much negligible. Essentially, AMD has brought nothing new to an already crowded table, and expects us to pay a premium for it. Whether they want to do that or have to because of shortages or supply issues doesn't really matter. What matters is that AMD's pricing makes it incredibly hard to recommend the 5500 XT, which is a real shame because other than price, it's a fantastic card. Rock solid 1080p performance, especially in esports titles, impressive efficiency, and decent looks and cooling, at least when it comes to the Gaming X version of the card, all let down by a ridiculous price tag. All of this during a time when everyone and their dog is complaining about AMD driver issues. It all just makes for a really unattractive package. All of that being said, AMD, you can still turn this around. Your hardware is good. You should be proud of it. Just focus on fixing your software and drop prices down to where deep down inside you know they should be. But enough whining. That's it for this review. If you liked the video, hit that button, get subscribed, and enable notifications. That's right, I know how many of you have them turned on, and y'all need to up your game. Just like MSI South Africa upped their game when they sent the card over for me to check out. So, big ups to them. Also, if you want to pick up any of the gear I talked about in the video, and want to help the channel out while you're at it, I'll be dropping affiliate links to where to buy them down below. And as always, if you want to help the channel out directly, I will leave a link to my Patreon in the description, so go and check it out. And that's all I got. Have a great whatever you're having, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Cheers!